The Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime looked exactly like what happens when you give a bunch of aliens unlimited budgets and zero taste. Crystalline spires jutted out at impossible angles, holographic displays flickered with the intensity of a disco ball having a seizure, and the whole place hummed with the kind of self-importance that could power a small moon. Ambassador Vextar, a 7-foot-tall stick insect with delusions of grandeur, stood at the center podium, his forearms gesticulating wildly. His translator collar buzzed with the efficiency of a dying bee as he addressed the assembled representatives of 1,200 civilizations. Esteemed colleagues, Vextar began, his voice dripping with the kind of drama usually reserved for soap operas. We face our darkest hour. The ancient quantum barriers protecting the Zephyrian star system are failing. 17 billion souls hang in the balance. The council chamber erupted in what could generously be called discussion but sounded more like a galactic game of hot potato. Council member Zilch, who looked like a purple bowling ball with eyes, rolled forward importantly. Perhaps we should consult the archives of infinite wisdom for guidance? The archives? Scoffed Blurble, a gelatinous blob who somehow managed to sound condescending despite lacking vocal cords. We need the sacred protocols of emergency response management. Chapter 4012 clearly states, "Gentle beings, please." Vextar raised all four arms. The quantum barriers were constructed by the ancients using technology beyond our comprehension for 10,000 years. Our greatest minds have studied these mechanisms. The mathematics alone require 17 dimensions of calculation. The quantum flux destabilizers operate on principles that violate known physics. It is, quite simply, impossible to repair. That's when Jake Morrison decided to empty the trash can right next to the speaker's podium. Jake was what aliens politely called a maintenance technician and what humans accurately called a janitor. He was 42, built like a refrigerator, and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that comes from fixing broken things while everyone else stands around talking about why they can't be fixed. He'd been half listening to the space drama while collecting discarded snack wrappers and ceremonial goblets. The whole thing sounded familiar. Real familiar. "Excuse me," Jake said, not bothering to look up from his trash bag. "Did you try turning it off and on again?" The chamber fell silent. You could have heard a quasar collapse, 1,700 alien eyes, tentacles, sensor arrays, and various other perception organs focused on the human janitor like he'd just suggested sacrificing their firstborn to the space gods. Vextar's translator collar sparked slightly. "I beg your pardon?" Jake finally looked up, shrugged, and cracked open a beer he'd been saving for his break. "The barrier thingy. Did anyone try unplugging it, waiting 30 seconds, and plugging it back in? Works 90% of the time." "This is barbarism," whispered Zilch, recoiling as if Jake had just proposed using a hammer to perform brain surgery, which, knowing humans, wasn't entirely off the table. "The sacred quantum barriers cannot simply be, as you say, turned off and on again," Vextar sputtered. "This is sophisticated technology that—" "Look, buddy." "Muddy," Jake interrupted, taking a swig of his beer. "I've been fixing stuff for 25 years. Space toilet, quantum toilet, doesn't matter. Same principle applies. Something's broken. Try the basics first. You'd be amazed how often the fancy solution is just the simple solution wearing a tuxedo." The council erupted in horrified chatter. Several representatives fainted. One species began what appeared to be their version of prayer, which involved spinning in circles while making high-pitched beeping sounds. Ambassador Vextar's eye stalks swiveled in confusion. "You, a mere sanitation engineer, believe you can solve what has confounded our greatest scientific minds." Jake finished his beer, crushed the can against his forehead, and tossed it in his bag. Wouldn't be the first time. 4 hours later, Jake found himself in what the aliens called a strategic planning facility and what looked suspiciously like a very expensive conference room. He'd made some phone calls, cashed in some favors, and assembled what he generously termed his crack team. Demolition Dave sat backwards in his chair because that's how Dave sat in every chair. At 55, he was built like a brick wall that had learned to walk and developed a personality disorder. He'd spent 30 years in construction and another 10 figuring out increasingly creative ways to blow things up. His philosophy was simple. If something's broken, hit it with something bigger until it works or stops being your problem. So let me get this straight, Dave said, popping his knuckles with sounds like small firecrackers. These space nerds can't fix their fancy force field, and they're asking us to do it? That's about the size of it, Jake confirmed. Technical Tina was busy turning the alien conference table into her personal support station. Cables snaked everywhere, connecting her laptop to several devices that definitely weren't designed to interface with human technology but were doing it anyway, because Tina had a gift. At 38, she'd spent 15 years explaining to people that no, she couldn't hack the Pentagon just because she fixed their printer. And yes, they really did need to restart their computer. I've been reading their technical specifications, Tina said, not looking up from her 17 monitors. Their documentation is worse than Microsoft's. No wonder they can't fix anything. Professor Bob was the closest thing they had to actual scientific credentials, having taught community college physics for 12 years before the budget cuts. He was thin, nervous, and had the look of a man who'd spent his career explaining basic concepts to students who thought gravity was optional. But he understood the fundamentals better than anyone, and sometimes that's all you need. The quantum barrier system is actually quite elegant, Bob said, adjusting his thick glasses. It's essentially a really big version of the same principles we use in quantum computing. Of course, our quantum computers need to be kept at temperatures close to absolute zero and isolated from all external interference. While this thing somehow maintains quantum coherence across an entire star system while being bombarded by cosmic radiation, solar wind, and the occasional asteroid. So, minor differences. That's when Commander Pristine entered the room. If Central Casting had been looking for the perfect uptight alien military officer, they would have sent Pristine home for being too on the nose. She was tall, silver, and radiated the kind of rigid efficiency that suggested she ironed her underwear and alphabetized her thoughts. I am Commander Pristine of the Galactic Defense Corps, she announced, standing at attention. I have been assigned as your liaison and will be monitoring your activities to ensure compliance with all relevant safety protocols, emergency procedures, and basic standards of civilized behavior. Great, Jake said. You can carry the beer. Pristine's expression suggested she'd just been asked to carry a bag of radioactive waste, which, given human alcohol's reputation in certain parts of the galaxy, but wasn't entirely inaccurate. Now then, Jake continued, we're going to need supplies. Dave, you still got that hardware store card? Does a bear poop in the woods? Dave grinned. Bears don't poop in woods anymore, Tina said absently. Climate change. Figure of speech, Tina? I know, I'm just saying. 2 hours later, they'd hit 3 hardware stores, an electronics supplier, and what Jake insisted on calling a research facility but was actually a liquor store. Their shopping list had confused several clerks, concerned a manager, and prompted one store to quietly call their insurance company. Commander Pristine watched in growing horror as they loaded their cart with duct tape, WD-40, a car battery, jumper cables, several hammers of varying sizes, a toolkit that had seen better decades, and enough beer to supply a small wedding. You intend to repair quantum barriers with duct tape? She asked. Duct tape is a universal constant, Professor Bob explained helpfully. It has a light side, a dark side, and it holds the universe together. That's the force, Tina corrected. Same difference. Their final stop was Dave's garage, where he retrieved what he called his lucky wrench. It was 18 inches of solid steel, covered in dents, scratches, and what looked like scorch marks. It had the weight and presence of a religious artifact, if religious artifacts were designed to fix stubborn bolts through applied violence. She's been with me through 43 major construction projects, Dave said, holding the wrench like a father holds his firstborn. Never let me down. It's a wrench, Commander Pristine observed. It's the wrench, Dave corrected. As they prepared to board their transport to the spaceport, Dave suddenly stopped. Wait, where's my wrench? In your hand, Jake pointed out. No, that's my backup wrench. Where's my lucky wrench? 20 minutes of searching later, they found it under a pile of Chinese takeout menus on Dave's kitchen counter. Commander Pristine's expression suggested she was beginning to understand why her species had strict protocols about everything. The Nebula Princess had been the jewel of the Galactic Cruise Line fleet until Jake's team commandeered it for their mission. It was designed for luxury travel, complete with 17 restaurants, 42 gift shops, and a spa that offered traditional relaxation treatments from 200 different worlds. Now it served as humanity's official problem-solving transport, which meant the bar was always open, and the hot tub had been converted into a giant cooler. Jake stood on the observation deck, beer in hand, watching hyperspace streak past in brilliant ribbons of light. Beside him, Dave was taking selfies with various cosmic phenomena, while Tina live-streamed their journey to what had become an increasingly large audience across the galaxy. "This is technical Tina reporting from deep space," she said to her camera, which was somehow maintaining a signal across 17 solar systems. "We're currently approaching the crisis zone. And I have to say, the accommodations are fantastic. The aliens really know how to travel. Though their idea of coffee tastes like battery acid had a fight with regret and lost." Professor Bob was in what used to be the ship's library, surrounded by alien technical manuals, human engineering textbooks, and cocktail napkins covered in equations. He'd been working on understanding the quantum barrier system, and his conclusions were, in his words, both fascinating and deeply disturbing. The barriers work by creating localized distortions in space-time, he explained to anyone within earshot, which was basically everyone since the ship wasn't that big. They're essentially convincing the universe that the space inside the barriers operates under different physical laws than the space outside. It's like having a snow globe where the snow falls upward, but only inside the globe. "So it's magic," Dave said. "Advanced technology that we don't understand yet," Bob corrected. "Arthur C. Clarke's third law. Same difference." Commander Pristine had spent the journey oscillating between professional disapproval and morbid curiosity. She'd filed 17 reports with Galactic Command, each more concerned than the last. Her latest communication had been titled Request for Emergency Psychological Evaluation. Are humans actually insane? The response had been a single word, probably. As they approached the Zephyrian system, the ship's sensors began picking up the quantum barriers. On the main display, they appeared as a shimmering dome of light surrounding the dying star and its planets, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "There she is," Jake said, raising his beer in salute. "The impossible problem that's got everyone's cosmic underwear in a twist." The barriers were indeed impressive. They stretched across billions of cubic miles of space, maintaining perfect stability despite the gravitational chaos of a star in its death throes. Energy readings showed power levels that could supply entire civilizations, all focused on maintaining the delicate quantum balance that kept 17 billion people alive. Tina pointed her camera at the display. "Okay, folks, we're looking at the famous quantum barriers that have stumped the galaxy's best and brightest for, apparently, centuries. Dave, what's your professional assessment?" Dave squinted at the massive energy readings, the complex mathematical models, and the visualization of quantum forces that existed in dimensions humans weren't supposed to be able to perceive. "Looks like someone forgot to change the cosmic batteries," he announced. Commander Pristine made a sound like air being let out of a very expensive balloon. "Dave might actually be onto something," Professor Bob said, studying his napkin calculations. The power distribution pattern suggest a degrading energy source. The barriers aren't failing because they're broken. They're failing because they're running out of juice. "See?" Jake said. "I told you guys. Turn it off, turn it on, check if it's plugged in." Basic troubleshooting. As their ship moved closer to the barriers, alien vessels from across the galaxy began arriving to watch. News networks, scientific research teams, and what appeared to be several gambling syndicates taking bets on whether the humans would succeed or accidentally destroy the solar system. Tina's livestream audience had grown to over 3 billion viewers across 400 species. The chat was a mixture of scientific analysis, morbid curiosity, and what appeared to be recipe exchanges. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in our database, came a transmission from a Zephyrian research vessel. We've been studying these barriers for our entire recorded history. Our greatest scientists believe they operate on principles beyond our understanding. Yeah, well, Jake said, finishing another beer, your greatest scientists probably never tried hitting it with a wrench. The next morning, which was relative since they were in space where morning was more of a philosophical concept than a temporal reality, the team assembled in the ship's converted cargo bay for what Jake called the professional assessment phase. This mostly involved Dave volunteering to be shot out of an airlock toward the quantum barriers to see what happens. Commander Pristine had initially vetoed this plan on grounds of basic sanity, but after Jake explained that Dave had once tested a new construction explosive by strapping it to his chest and lighting it, she'd agreed it was probably safer than whatever Plan B involved. Dave suited up in what the aliens assured them was their most advanced protective gear. It looked like someone had wrapped a refrigerator in Christmas lights and added a fishbowl helmet. Dave emerged from the airlock with the grace of a brick learning to fly, propelled by a thruster pack that he'd immediately figured out how to hot rod. Testing, Dave's voice crackled through the comm. Okay, I'm about 50 meters from the barrier. It's definitely doing something. The readouts are showing energy levels that would make a nuclear reactor jealous. And there's this humming sound like my neighbor's air conditioner on steroids. What does it feel like? Professor Bob asked, taking notes on what had started as technical documentation but was rapidly becoming a diary of concerned confusion. Like sticking your finger in a light socket, but cosmically, Dave reported. Also, my mustache is standing on end, which is new. Dave extended one heavily gloved hand toward the barrier. The moment his suit made contact, every sensor on their ship started screaming warnings in 12 languages and what sounded like interpretive dance. Interesting, Dave said conversationally as energy arsed around his suit like he'd become a human lightning rod. It's not actually hurting me. It's more like it's trying to figure out what I am and getting really confused by the results. Back on the ship? Nag. Professor Bob was frantically scribbling equations on napkins while Tina recorded everything, and Jake provided color commentary that was rapidly being translated into 400 languages by increasingly baffled alien linguists. The barrier's quantum signature is fluctuating, Bob announced. It's like it was designed to handle specific types of matter and energy, but Dave's biological signature is something it's never encountered before. That's because Dave's not technically from this galaxy originally, Jake said. His family moved here from Earth when he was 6. That was 49 years ago, Jake. Yeah, but you know Dave. He holds grudges. Through the observation window, they watched Dave produce his backup wrench and gently tap it against the barrier. The response was immediate and spectacular. Energy readings spiked, the barrier flickered, and for a moment they could see straight through to the dying star beyond. Did you just knock on a quantum barrier? Commander Pristine asked, her voice reaching octaves that her species wasn't supposed to be capable of producing. Seemed polite, Dave replied. Professor Bob's excitement was reaching dangerous levels. He'd covered 17 napkins with equations and was starting on the cocktail umbrellas. The barriers are responding to physical interaction. They're not just energy constructs, they're somehow designed to interface with matter on a macro scale. In English, Bob, Tina said, still filming. It's like a really, really big touchscreen that's been waiting 17,000 years for someone to actually touch it. That's when things got interesting. Dave's gentle tapping had apparently activated some kind of diagnostic mode. The barrier began displaying what could only be described as a cosmic error message, written in symbols that hurt to look at directly. I can read some of this, Professor Bob said, squinting at the display. It's mathematics, but mathematics that assumes you understand 17 dimensions and have a PhD in impossible physics. But the basic message seems to be, oh dear. What? Jake asked. It says system error, unable to contact technical support. Please try again later. Dave's voice crackled through the comm with the satisfaction of a man who'd just proven a point. See? I told you guys. It's a tech support problem. Commander Pristine was making rapid notes in what appeared to be her official report, though the handwriting was becoming increasingly erratic. Several alien news crews had moved closer to get better footage of the humans' unorthodox approach, and the betting pools had shifted dramatically in favor of unprecedented success through methods that violate common sense. The galaxy watched as humanity's finest minds approached an impossible problem with the kind of practical wisdom that comes from years of fixing things that weren't supposed to be broken in the first place. It was about to get much more interesting. The cosmic equivalent of a reset button turned out to be a crystalline structure the size of a small building, floating in perfect geometric harmony at the exact center of the barrier network. It pulsed with the kind of energy that made nuclear fusion look like a birthday candle, and it was covered in what Professor Bob generously called user interface elements, and what everyone else accurately described as buttons you probably shouldn't push. "Well," Jake said, studying the structure through their ship's enhanced scanners, "that's definitely a control panel." Dave had been retrieved from his barrier-tapping expedition and was now studying the readings with the intense focus he usually reserved for particularly stubborn bolts. "Look at that thing. It's got more switches than a recording studio. But see that big red one in the center? That's got to be the main power." The large red activation mechanism does appear to be the primary control interface, Commander Pristine agreed reluctantly. She'd stopped filing reports altogether after her superiors had responded to her latest update with what roughly translated to just roll with it and try not to die. Tina had managed to hack into the barrier's diagnostic systems using a combination of human networking protocols and what she called aggressive politeness. Her screens were now displaying information that the galaxy's greatest minds had been trying to access for millennia. "Okay, this is interesting," she announced. "The system's been running continuously for approximately 17,000 years, which explains why it's having performance issues. When's the last time any of you went 17,000 years without a reboot?" "I reboot every morning," Dave said, "usually around the third cup of coffee." "Exactly. But here's the really weird part. The system requires authentication to perform a reset, and according to the logs, the last successful admin login was, well, about 17,000 years ago." Professor Bob looked up from his napkin calculations. "So we need a password?" "We need the password. The master admin password that's been protecting this system since it was installed." Jake cracked open another beer and considered this. In his experience, there were really only a few possibilities when it came to passwords that had been set up by technicians and forgotten by management. People were predictable, even across species and millennia. "Try password," he suggested. Tina typed it in. "Nope. Try password 123. That's actually, hold on." Tina's fingers flew over her keyboard. "The system uses a different character set, but the conceptual translation would be, oh, you've got to be kidding me." The crystalline control structure pulsed, and they say, "Yeah." Suddenly, every screen in their ship was displaying what could only be described as a welcome message written in symbols that looked like someone had asked a mathematician to design hieroglyphics while having a seizure. "Welcome," Administrator Professor Bob translated slowly. "System status, critical. Last maintenance, never. Would you like to run a diagnostic?" "Run the diagnostic," Jake said. The results were immediate and comprehensive. According to the system's own analysis, the quantum barriers were operating at 12% efficiency. Had accumulated roughly 17,000 years worth of cosmic dust and debris. Were running on backup power, because the main generators had failed sometime during what humans called the Bronze Age, and desperately needed what the translation software rendered as percussive maintenance. "Percussive maintenance?" Commander Pristine asked. "Hitting it with something heavy until it works," Dave explained cheerfully. "My specialty." The diagnostic also revealed something else. The barriers hadn't been built by the mysterious ancients that everyone assumed. They'd been built by humans. Specifically, by a human engineering crew that had been contracted to protect the Zephyrian system during their star's transition to a red giant. The crew had finished the job, submitted their final report, and apparently left documentation that could charitably be described as adequate. and accurately described as notes scribbled on the back of a coffee-stained work order. "So humans built this thing originally?" Tina asked. "Apparently," Professor Bob said, reading through the installation logs. "And judging by these notes, they had about the same attitude toward documentation that we do. The entire technical manual is 3 pages long and consists mainly of diagrams that look like they were drawn by a 5-year-old with a crayon shortage." "Sounds about right," Jake said. "So what's the reset procedure?" The reset procedure, according to the original documentation, was elegantly simple. Turn the main power off, wait 30 seconds, turn it back on, and give it a good whack if it makes funny noises. The main power switch was the big red button Dave had identified. The good whack apparently referred to a specific calibration procedure involving the application of kinetic force to 7 precisely located impact points around the control structure. "You mean I get to hit it with my wrench?" Dave asked, his eyes lighting up like Christmas morning. "According to the original specs, percussive calibration is not only recommended, it's required," Professor Bob confirmed. What followed was probably the most watched maintenance procedure in galactic history. Dave suited up again, this time carrying his lucky wrench and a checklist that Professor Bob had translated from the original human engineering notes. Their ship moved into position next to the control structure while 17 billion Zephyrians and 3 billion livestream viewers held their collective breath. "Okay, Dave," Jake said over the comm. "Hit the big red button, count to 30, hit it again, then apply percussive maintenance to points 1 through 7, according to the technical specifications." "Copy that," Dave replied. "And if all else fails, hit it harder." Dave pressed the button. The quantum barriers which had protected an entire star system for 17 millennia simply turned off. The energy dome that had kept billions alive flickered and vanished like someone had unplugged the universe's most important nightlight. For 30 seconds, the Zephyrian system sat naked and vulnerable in the cosmic wind while Dave counted slowly and 17 billion people held their breath. Then Dave hit the button again, and the barriers blazed back to life with the intensity of a young sun. Energy readings showed 100% efficiency for the first time in recorded history. The cosmic humming that had troubled alien scientists for generations settled into a smooth, steady rhythm. "Percussive maintenance time," Dave announced, raising his wrench like a conductor preparing to lead the galaxy's strangest orchestra. 7 perfectly placed impacts later, the quantum barriers were running better than they had in 17,000 years. The system reported full functionality, optimal power efficiency, and what the translation software rendered as job satisfaction. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity's most impossible problem was solved by humanity's most basic solution, turning it off and on again, then hitting it with a wrench. The aftermath of saving 17 billion lives was, predictably, buried in paperwork. The Galactic Council had forms for everything except impossible problem solved by Janitor, and his friends in one afternoon using methods that violate 17 different safety protocols and common sense. Jake sat in the same conference room where this had all started, watching Ambassador Vextar try to process what had happened. The alien diplomat's forearms were moving in what appeared to be a complex gesture of confusion mixed with grudging respect and existential crisis. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," Vextar said slowly. "You solved a 17,000-year-old crisis by," and I quote from the report, "turning it off and on again, then hitting it with a wrench." "Pretty much," Jake confirmed, finishing his beer. Though to be fair, it was Dave's lucky wrench that probably made the difference. Dave, who was sitting backwards in his chair because that's how Dave sat in chairs, nodded seriously. "She's got 17,000 years of experience fixing stubborn problems. I wouldn't trust the job to just any wrench." Tina was busy setting up their new business. She'd already registered the domain name humansfixstuffgood.com and was designing a website that promised reasonable rates, unreasonable results, and all the percussive maintenance you can handle. "Our consulting fee structure is pretty simple," she explained to Commander Pristine, who was taking notes with the dedication of someone trying to explain the inexplicable to her superiors. "Standard troubleshooting starts at 50 credits per hour, plus materials and beer. Impossible problems that stump entire civilizations run about 200 credits per hour, but we throw in the victory celebration for free. Professor Bob had been invited to present his findings to the Galactic Scientific Academy, but he declined in favor of returning to his community college job. "I've got a Physics 101 class on Tuesday," he'd explained. "Can't let the students down. Besides, after this, explaining basic mechanics is going to be refreshingly simple." The real revelation had been the discovery that humans had originally built the quantum barriers. Archaeological teams were now searching Earth's records for evidence of humanity's forgotten galactic engineering period. Though most of the documentation appeared to have been lost in what historians called the Great Filing Cabinet Reorganization of 2847. "It appears humans have been solving impossible problems for quite some time," Vextar observed. "We're good at fixing things," Jake agreed. "It's kind of our specialty. We see something broken, we figure out how to make it work again. Usually involves hitting it, but not always. Sometimes you have to sweet-talk it first," Dave added helpfully. The Galactic Council had officially recognized their team as emergency problem resolution specialists, which came with a fancy certificate, diplomatic immunity, and a retainer that would keep them comfortable for several lifetimes. They'd also been granted the exclusive right to use percussive maintenance on any galactic-scale crisis, which Dave considered the greatest honor of his career. Their first official consulting job was already waiting. The Andromedans had been dealing with an ancient artificial intelligence that had somehow gotten stuck in an endless loop of customer service transfers. For 10,000 years it had been trying to report a bug in its own programming, but kept getting transferred between departments that no longer existed. "How long has it been on hold?" Jake asked, reading the briefing materials. "Approximately 10 millennia," Commander Pristine replied. "It's become something of a galactic legend. The AI occasionally sends status updates consisting entirely of increasingly frustrated emoticons. But sounds like a job for technical Tina," Jake said. "I've already packed extra patience and a really good hold music playlist," Tina confirmed. As they prepared for their next mission, Dave suddenly looked around with the expression of a man who'd lost something important. "Has anyone seen my lucky wrench?" he asked. 20 minutes of searching later, they found it in the ship's refrigerator, right next to the beer. Nobody asked how it had gotten there, because with Dave, some questions were better left unanswered. "Next stop, Andromeda," Jake announced, raising his beer in salute. "Another day, another impossible problem that just needs the right application of human common sense." Commander Pristine made a note in her official report. "Note to command. Recommend updating crisis response protocols to include option for just ask the humans. Also recommend increasing alcohol budget for all diplomatic missions." As their ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, alarms began blaring across the galaxy. Another crisis was developing in the Rigel system, something about a cosmic bureaucracy error that had accidentally erased 3 solar systems from official existence. The affected populations were technically alive but legally non-existent, which was causing all sorts of problems with their insurance claims. "Think they'll need our help with that one?" Dave asked, watching the emergency broadcasts with professional interest. "Probably," Jake said. "Bureaucracy problems are right in our wheelhouse. Though we might need to stop at the hardware store first. I'm thinking this one's going to require some heavy-duty red tape cutters." The galaxy was learning what humans had known for millennia. There's no problem so complex that it can't be solved by the right combination of practical thinking, basic tools, and the willingness to try the obvious solution that everyone else is too sophisticated to consider. Somewhere in the cosmos, impossible problems trembled in fear at the sound of humans cracking open beers and asking, "So what exactly is broken here?" The universe had never been in better hands.